The digital clock on Detective Frank Paulson's desk read 3:47 a.m. when the email arrived. Subject line, "You need to see this." The sender was a number he didn't recognize, but the attachment made his coffee go cold. It was a photograph of a driver's license, Benjamin Russo's driver's license. The same Benjamin Russo who had vanished without a trace on the Bonneville Salt Flats 14 years ago, leaving behind only his rental car with the keys still in the ignition and a half-empty water bottle on the dashboard. Frank had been a rookie detective in Toole County back then, barely 2 months into his shield when the case landed on his desk. Benjamin had been a 32-year-old photographer from Portland, Oregon, traveling cross-country to document America's most desolate landscapes. His girlfriend at the time, Rebecca, had reported him missing after he failed to check in during his scheduled stop near Wendover. Search crews had combed the 40 square miles of salt flats for 3 weeks. They'd used helicopters, search dogs, even brought in a specialist team from Salt Lake City who understood the unique dangers of the terrain, the way the salt crust could break through to the mud layer below, how summer temperatures could reach 120 degrees, how disorienting the endless white expanse could be. They'd found nothing. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not a single clue beyond that abandoned Toyota Camry sitting on the access road near the Bonneville Speedway. The case had gone cold within 6 months, filed away with the dozens of other unsolved disappearances that haunted Frank's career. Rebecca had moved on eventually, married someone else, started a family in Seattle. Benjamin's parents had held a memorial service 2 years after he vanished, though his mother refused to give up hope until the day she died. His father still sent Frank Christmas cards, always with the same handwritten note. "If you ever find out what happened, please tell me. Before you dive deeper into this mystery, take a moment to subscribe to our channel and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We read every single one, and your support helps us bring you more stories like this." Now, back to Benjamin's story. The email contained no message, just the photo and a video file. Frank clicked it open, his hand trembling slightly. The footage was grainy, clearly transferred from an old VHS tape. The timestamp in the corner read August 19, 2011. 3 days after Benjamin was last seen. The camera work was shaky, amateur, but the subject matter was unmistakable. It showed a figure in the distance, walking across the salt flats, stumbling occasionally. The person wore jeans and a blue shirt, matching the description of what Benjamin had been wearing. But the footage was too far away to make out facial features. Then the camera zoomed in, and Frank felt his breath catch. The person was carrying something, a camera bag, slung across his shoulder. Benjamin's camera bag had never been found. The figure walked for another 30 seconds of footage, then seemed to collapse. The camera operator didn't approach, didn't call out. They just kept filming for another minute before the tape cut to static. Frank's mind raced through the implications. Someone had been out there. Someone had seen Benjamin, possibly in distress, and had done nothing. Or had they done something worse? He grabbed his phone and called his partner, Detective Amy Lynn, waking her from sleep. "I'm sending you something. We need to trace this email. Now." By sunrise, they had a location for the IP address, a public library in Elko, Nevada, about 100 miles west of Wendover. Frank and Amy were in the car by 7, making the drive in silence. The library opened at 9, and the staff was cooperative, but not particularly helpful. Their public computers didn't require login credentials, and the security camera footage had been automatically deleted after 30 days. Dead end. But Amy noticed something. On the community bulletin board, there was a flyer for an estate sale happening that weekend. Lifetime collection of vintage media, VHS tapes, cassettes, records. Everything must go. The address was in a neighborhood just 10 minutes away. The name on the flyer, Gordon Patterson, survived by his daughter, Julie Patterson. They decided to take a chance. Julie Patterson answered the door of the modest ranch house with red eyes and a tissue in her hand. She was in her late 40s, dressed in an oversized sweater despite the morning heat. "If you're here about the estate sale, it doesn't start until Saturday," she said, her voice hoarse. Frank showed his badge. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Paulson from Toole County. This is Detective Lynn. We're investigating a cold case, and we believe your father may have had information relevant to our inquiry. May we come in?" Julie's face went pale. She stepped aside without a word, leading them into a living room packed with cardboard boxes. The smell of dust and old paper hung in the air. "My father passed 3 weeks ago," she said, sitting heavily on the couch. "Heart attack. He was 78. What case are you talking about?" Amy pulled up the photograph from the email on her phone. "Did your father ever mention a man named Benjamin Russo, or talk about something he witnessed on the Bonneville Salt Flats in August 2011? Julie's hands began to shake. "Oh, God," she whispered. "The tape. You saw the tape." Frank leaned forward. "Ma'am, did you send us that email?" She nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I found it 2 days ago going through Dad's things. He had hundreds of VHS tapes. He was obsessed with recording everything, documenting every trip, every family gathering. Most of it's just boring stuff, vacations and birthdays. But then I found one labeled differently. It just said Salt Flats 2011 in his handwriting. I watched it and She covered her face with her hands. "I didn't know what to do. I couldn't sleep. So I looked up missing persons from that time and place. Found your name on an old news article and sent it. I used the library computer because I was scared. I don't know why, I just was." "Julie," Amy said gently, "we need to know everything. Why was your father out there? What else was on that tape?" Julie stood and walked to one of the boxes, digging through it until she pulled out a VHS cassette. "He was a rockhound," she said. "That's what he called himself. He collected rocks and minerals, went out to remote places looking for specimens. The Salt Flats were one of his regular spots. He'd go out there to collect gypsum crystals that formed after the winter floods evaporated. He went out there dozens of times over the years." She handed Frank the tape. "This is the original. I made a digital copy before I sent it. There's more on here than what I showed you. After that man collapsed, the camera keeps running. Dad gets closer, and you can hear his voice. He sounds panicked." Frank held the tape like it was made of glass. "What does he say?" Julie's voice broke. "He says he's not breathing. Oh God, he's not breathing." And then the tape cuts out. The next footage is from a week later, somewhere completely different, like he just taped over whatever came after. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Frank exchanged a look with Amy. They both knew what this meant. Gordon Patterson had witnessed Benjamin Russo's death, and he'd never reported it. The question was why. "Did your father ever seem troubled?" Frank asked. "In the years after 2011, did his behavior change?" Julie wiped her eyes. "He stopped going to the Salt Flats. That much I know. He used to go out there at least once a month, but after that summer, never again. And he got more secretive, I guess, more protective of his tape collection. He kept it all locked in his office, wouldn't let anyone in there. I thought he was just being paranoid in his old age." Amy stood, walking to the window. "Julie, I need you to think carefully. Did your father have any health issues in August 2011? Any reason he might not have been able to help someone in distress?" "He had a heart condition even then," Julie said quietly. "He'd had a minor heart attack the year before. The doctor told him to avoid stress, avoid overexertion. Maybe he was afraid that if he tried to help, he'd have another attack out there. Maybe he panicked and just left." Frank's jaw tightened. It was a plausible explanation, but it didn't make it right. A man had died alone on those salt flats while someone watched, too afraid to act. But Gordon Patterson was dead now, too. Whatever guilt he'd carried, he'd taken it to his grave. "We'll need to take this tape as evidence," Frank said, "and we'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. But Julie, you did the right thing by reaching out. After 14 years, a family is finally going to get answers." As they drove back toward Tuil County, the tape sitting in an evidence bag on the back seat, Frank thought about Benjamin's father. The man would be in his 80s now if he was still alive. Would knowing the truth bring him peace, or would it just open old wounds? Did it matter? Justice and closure weren't always the same thing. Frank had learned that over the years. Amy broke the silence. "We need to recover the body, or what's left of it." 14 years in that environment, Frank said. Salt, heat, winter floods. There might not be anything left to find. "We have to try. We have GPS coordinates from the video metadata, and we have a duty to his family." Frank nodded. She was right, of course. By afternoon, they had assembled a team, forensic anthropologists from the University of Utah, search and rescue specialists, and a BLM representative since the salt flats were federal land. The operation was scheduled for the following morning, weather permitting. The forecast showed clear skies and temperatures in the mid-90s, brutal conditions, but manageable for an experienced team. That evening, Frank made the call he'd been dreading. He found the most recent number for Harold Russo, Benjamin's father. The phone rang 4 times before a weak voice answered. "Hello? Mr. Russo, this is Detective Frank Paulson from Tuil County Sheriff's Office. We spoke many years ago about your son, Benjamin." There was a long pause. "You found him." It wasn't a question. Somehow Harold knew. Maybe he'd always known deep down that this call would come. "We believe we have," Frank said carefully. "We've received new evidence that suggests we know the location where he passed away. We're conducting a recovery operation tomorrow. I wanted you to hear it from me first, before it hits the news." Harold Russo's breath rattled through the phone. How? How did you find him after all this time?" Frank explained about the tape, about Gordon Patterson, about the footage that had been sitting in a cardboard box for 14 years. He left out the worst parts, the fact that someone had watched Benjamin die without helping, without calling for aid. That detail could wait for another conversation, or maybe never. Some truths were too cruel to serve any purpose. "Can I be there?" Harold asked. "When you find him, I want to be there." "Sir, it's going to be difficult terrain and extreme heat. I'm not sure." "I'm 83 years old, Detective. I buried my wife 5 years ago. My son has been gone for 14 years, and I've spent every single day wondering if he suffered, if he was scared, if he called out for help that never came. I need to be there." "Please." Frank closed his eyes. "I'll have someone pick you up. We leave at dawn." The Bonneville Salt Flats stretched out like an alien world under the early morning sun, the white expanse so bright it hurt to look at without sunglasses. The team gathered near the coordinates extracted from the video file, approximately 2 miles northeast of the Bonneville Speedway access road, in an area that saw almost no foot traffic. During the winter, this section was often flooded by shallow pools that dissolved the salt crust and redistributed it. During the summer, it was a furnace. Harold Russo sat in the air-conditioned command vehicle, watching through the window. He'd aged 20 years in the 14 that had passed. His hair was completely white now, his frame bent and fragile, but his eyes were sharp, focused on the figures moving across the salt in their search grid pattern. It took 3 hours. The forensic team used ground-penetrating radar and probing tools, searching for any anomaly beneath the salt crust. When they finally found something, the excitement was subdued, respectful. They'd located what appeared to be human remains beneath approximately 18 inches of salt and dried mud. likely deposited by years of winter flooding and summer evaporation. The excavation was painstaking. Every action had to be photographed, every layer documented. By noon, they had exposed enough to confirm it. Skeletal remains, along with fabric fragments consistent with denim and cotton. A leather camera bag, weathered but intact, lay partially beneath the body. Inside were a Canon camera with a telephoto lens, a wallet containing Benjamin Russo's identification and credit cards, and a waterproof notebook filled with handwritten notes about light conditions and exposure settings. Frank approached the command vehicle. Harold was already climbing out, moving faster than seemed possible for a man his age. "Let me see him," he said. "Please." The team had erected a privacy tent around the excavation site. Frank led Harold inside, supporting his elbow. The old man knelt in the salt beside his son's remains, his hand hovering over the skull before finally touching it, gently, like he was afraid it might crumble to dust. "I'm sorry I couldn't find you sooner," Frank said quietly. Harold shook his head. "You found him. That's what matters." He pulled something from his pocket, a photograph, edges worn from years of handling. It showed a young Benjamin, probably in his 20s, standing on a mountain peak with a camera around his neck, grinning at whoever was taking the picture. "He loved this," Harold said. "Photography. He saw the world differently than everyone else. He could find beauty in a rusted car or a dead tree. He wanted to show people things they'd never noticed before. The camera and his notebook survived," Frank said. "We'll get them processed, return them to you when we can." Can you develop the film?" Harold asked suddenly. "If there's film in that camera, can you develop it? I want to see what he saw. I want to see the last things he photographed." Frank nodded. "We'll do our best." The forensic anthropologist, Dr. Rebecca Chen, approached them carefully. She was a small woman with kind eyes, someone who'd spent her career treating the dead with more dignity than many people showed the living. "Mr. Russo, I've conducted a preliminary examination. Based on the position of the remains and the absence of trauma to the bones, it appears your son died of natural causes, most likely heat-related illness. Hypothermia can cause disorientation, collapse, and rapid death, especially in an environment like this. He wouldn't have suffered long." It was small comfort, but Harold accepted it with a nod. "Why didn't that man help him?" he asked. "The one with the camera. Why did he just watch?" Frank had been expecting this question. He had a serious heart condition. He was probably terrified that if he exerted himself trying to help, he'd die too. It doesn't make it right, but it might explain why he made the choice he did, and he carried the guilt of it for the rest of his life. "Good," Harold said, and there was steel in his voice. "He should have." The recovery took the rest of the day. Every bone, every fragment of clothing, every personal item was carefully collected and catalogued. The camera bag yielded additional treasures: a second notebook with sketches and location notes, a spare lens cap, and wrapped in a waterproof bag, a letter. It was addressed to Rebecca, Benjamin's girlfriend. Frank opened it carefully, conscious of Harold watching. The ink had faded but was still legible. He read it aloud. "Beck, if you're reading this, something went wrong. I'm out on the salt flats, chasing the perfect shot. Sunrise over the Bonneville, the way the light refracts through the salt crystals. It's going to be beautiful. I know you worry when I go out to remote places, so I'm writing this just in case. I want you to know that I'm doing what I love. If something happens to me out here, don't be sad. I got to see things most people never see. I got to capture moments that would have been lost forever, and I got to love you, which was the best part of all. Be happy, Beck. Find someone who makes you laugh the way I did. Live a big, beautiful life. All my love, Ben." Harold's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Frank folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the evidence bag. They would get it to Rebecca eventually. She deserved to know that Benjamin's last thoughts had been of her, that even facing danger, he'd been trying to protect her from worry. That night, back at the station, Frank sat alone in the evidence room with Benjamin's camera. The film lab had confirmed there was indeed film inside, a partially used roll of 36 exposures. They'd developed it using specialized techniques for degraded film, and the results had arrived an hour ago. 23 photos had been recoverable. Frank spread them out on the table, looking at the world through Benjamin Russo's eyes. The first images were from earlier in his trip, the Grand Canyon at sunset, slot canyons in Arizona with light streaming through narrow openings, an abandoned gas station in New Mexico. Then came the salt flats. Benjamin had captured the infinite horizon, the geometric patterns of salt crystals, the Silver Island Mountains in the distance. He'd photographed tire tracks curving across the white expanse, wind-blown ridges that looked like waves in an ocean of salt. Each image was composed with an artist's eye, finding extraordinary beauty in one of the most barren places on Earth. The last photograph showed Benjamin's own shadow stretching across the salt, long and distorted by the angle of the morning sun. His arm was raised, camera held high. It was a self-portrait without showing his face, just his silhouette and the vastness around him. Frank stared at it for a long time. This was the last thing Benjamin Russo had created before he died. A shadow on salt. Temporary, soon to be erased by wind and time, but captured forever on film. Amy found him there an hour later. Harold's lawyer called. He wants to arrange the funeral as soon as we release the remains. And Rebecca, Benjamin's ex, she called too. Somehow she heard about the recovery. She wants to know if she can attend. Of course she can, Frank said. She loved him. That doesn't stop just because time passes or because you build a new life. Amy sat down across from him, looking at the photographs. Did we do right by him? 14 years is a long time to wait for justice. This isn't about justice, Frank said. Gordon Patterson is dead. There's no one to charge, no trial to prepare for. This is about giving a family closure, letting them grieve properly, letting them know that Benjamin didn't just vanish into nothing. He existed, he died, and now he can rest in peace. What about the tape? Julie Patterson asked if we need her to testify anywhere. Frank shook his head. The tape becomes part of the evidence file, part of the permanent record, but there's no case to prosecute. We'll include her statement in the final report, and that'll be the end of it. Unless... He paused. Unless we decide to make it public. There might be other families out there, other disappearances on the flats or in remote places. Maybe knowing that someone kept silent will encourage other people to come forward if they have information. It was something to consider, but not tonight. Tonight was for Benjamin, for the lonely death he'd suffered, and the 14 years his family had spent in limbo. Frank gathered up the photographs and placed them carefully in a folder. These would go to Harold, along with the notebooks and the camera. They were the last pieces of his son, the last proof that Benjamin Russo had been here, had seen things worth photographing, had loved someone worth writing to. The funeral was held on a Saturday morning in Portland, at a cemetery on a hillside overlooking the city. The turnout was smaller than it might have been. 14 years was a long time, and many of Benjamin's friends had moved on, started families, relocated for jobs. But those who came were genuine in their grief. Rebecca was there with her husband, a quiet man who stood respectfully back while she placed a single white rose on the casket. Harold gave a brief eulogy, his voice steady despite his age. "My son was an artist," he said. "He saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. He found beauty in decay, meaning in emptiness, hope in desolation. He died doing what he loved, in a place that most people would consider God-forsaken. But Benjamin didn't see it that way. He saw the Bonneville salt flats as a canvas, an opportunity to capture something unique. And he did. His last photographs are proof of that. He left us too soon, and the manner of his leaving will always haunt me. But I'm grateful to finally know. I'm grateful to bring him home, and I'm grateful to Detective Paulson and his team for never completely giving up, even when the case went cold. After the ceremony, Rebecca approached Frank. She was in her mid-40s now, with grey streaks in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, "for finding him, for the letter. I've been married to David for 9 years, and I love him very much. But Ben was my first love, my first real love. Not knowing what happened to him was like having a wound that never healed. Now it can." "He wanted you to be happy," Frank said. "He said so in the letter." She smiled, tears streaming down her face. "I am happy, and now I can be happy without guilt. That's his last gift to me." Frank watched her rejoin her husband, watched them drive away from the cemetery. He thought about the strange chain of events that had led to this day: Gordon Patterson's death, his daughter's discovery of the tape, her courage in coming forward despite her fear. If any one of those elements had been different, Benjamin Russo might have remained lost forever, another unsolved disappearance in a county that had too many. Back in Tooele County, life returned to its normal rhythm. The case file was officially closed, the evidence archived. Julie Patterson donated her father's collection of VHS tapes to the local historical society, after carefully reviewing each one to make sure there were no other hidden tragedies. Most were exactly what she'd expected: family gatherings, vacations, rock-hounding trips to various locations across Utah and Nevada. Gordon had been a meticulous documenter of his own life, even if he'd failed to document the most important moment when it mattered. Frank retired 6 months later, after 32 years in law enforcement. The Benjamin Russo case was his last major solve, though he didn't like that word. It implied a victory, and there were no winners here. Just a family with answers, and a dead man who could finally rest. At his retirement party, Amy gave a speech that mentioned the case, calling it an example of Frank's persistence and dedication. But Frank knew the truth. He hadn't found Benjamin through detective work or clever investigation. He'd found him through luck, the random chance of a man dying, a daughter cleaning out his house, a conscience that couldn't stay silent even 14 years after the fact. On his last day, Frank drove out to the Bonneville salt flats. He parked at the Bonneville Speedway access road, in almost the exact spot where Benjamin's rental car had been found all those years ago. The flats stretched out before him, brilliant white under the afternoon sun. In the distance, he could see the Silver Island Mountains, hazy in the heat shimmer. It was beautiful in its desolation, he had to admit. He understood why Benjamin had been drawn here, why Gordon had come back again and again. There was something primal about this place, something that stripped away all pretense and left only earth and sky. Frank thought about the dozens of other missing persons cases still on the books, the families still waiting for answers that might never come. He thought about all the secrets buried in the desert, in the mountains, in the vast empty spaces of the West. How many lost souls were out there, slowly being erased by wind and time? How many witnesses had kept silent out of fear or guilt or simple self-preservation? The questions would outlive him, he knew. There would always be mysteries that remained unsolved, not because the answers didn't exist, but because they were locked away in someone's conscience, recorded on a tape in someone's basement, written in a notebook that would be thrown away when its owner died. But sometimes, just sometimes, the truth found its way out. Sometimes a daughter cleaning out her father's house stumbled across evidence that changed everything. Sometimes a retired detective got to call a grieving family and say the words they'd waited 14 years to hear. "We found him." That had to be enough. In a world full of darkness and uncertainty, those small moments of resolution were precious. They were what kept people like Frank doing the work, year after year, case after case, even when the odds seemed impossible. He stood there for a long time, watching the light change as the sun moved across the sky. When he finally got back in his car and drove away, he didn't look back. Some places were meant to be left behind, some ghosts were meant to rest, and some stories, no matter how they ended, deserved to be told, so that the lost would be remembered, so that the families could heal, so that the silence that had surrounded Benjamin Russo's death for 14 years could finally be broken. The truth had set everyone free, even if it had taken a thrift store tape and a guilty conscience to do it. In the end, that was all any of them could ask for. The truth, however it came, however long it took. The truth and the peace that came with knowing.